Hello Internet! So I'm here today to talk to you about the Solo Assistant for Lock and Load Tactical. This is the one that comes with Heroes of the Bitter Harvest you see here, although they did also release a standalone Lock and Load Tactical Solo Assistant. From my understanding, this is effectively the same game. What you have here is what makes up the AEO, the Artificial Enemy Opponent. And it does so with the use of this stack of cards here, a bunch of flowcharts, and some really simple rules to tie all together. I've spent a lot of time with this recently, so I'm going to do a bit of a dive down into how the system works, the components that make it up, and I'll run you through a little game to show you how it plays in reality. So this might be quite a long video, but I'll put in some chapters down below, so if you want to skip to the end just get my thoughts, if there's a specific thing you want a bit of clarity on, feel free to dig around. But I do hope you will watch the whole thing because it's worth looking into this. So on with the show. Now, before you can play a game against the Artificial Enemy Opponent, the AEO, you need to build your deck of Solo Assistant cards. In total there are 100, but this starts with this common batch here. These are the generic AEO order cards. There's 36 of them in total, and they have a pretty standard layout. So in the top right corner there are dice rolls in German and Russian colours. So you draw these cards at the beginning of an impulse to find out what you should be doing that impulse, what order they're going to be following. But also every time the opponent needs a die roll, you can draw one of these cards. So you've got the 1d6 in your colour, or 2d6 if you combine them. You can just roll dice as normal, but it's just another alternative for that random number generation. And if you're going to go for the AEO deck, you might as well go all in. And when the die rolls are just for you, it makes them feel a little bit more special. So moving on from there, you've got the orders to be taken. So when you look at it, it goes top down, and if there's anything that you can't achieve, you move to the next section down. The first area is the high threat area. So this deals with the orders you should go with if there's someone 1 hex range from you. So the AEO has someone in a hex, and in an adjacent hex there is your units. There is a assailant, and then you go for the first one. So enter melee. If that doesn't work, you go to overrun if firepower greater than target. If that doesn't work, then you go to fire. So if you can't follow through on any of those things, if none of them fit the situation, then you move to the next. See, is there anyone within 2 hexes? Right. Oh, execute counteractions. That goes on to the flowcharts I'll show you in a minute. And if there's none of these things match in this high threat, if there's no action you can actually take in the threat level, it moves to the battlefield situation, which is more generic encounters. So the first one, the highest firepower AEO closest to a player unit that just acted, they fire. If, for example, there's no player unit that just acted, or no one with line of sight, you move to the next one. And you keep going and going and going, and if you, for whatever reason, you can't find anything that will match on a card, but by the time you get to the bottom, you generally don't get anywhere near that far. But if there is nothing, then that counts as the AEO making a pass, and you're on to the next turn. So that's the basic layout of the AEO order card, and this is going to be the bulk of your deck. So you have these generic AEO orders, which are suitable for most activities, but you also add to those depending on whether the opponent is the attacker or defender in a scenario, either as the defensive AEO cards or the offensive AEO cards. So these are also denoted by a silver star or a gold star. That's the level of energy in the offense or defense, I suppose. So if the AEO is going to be playing the attack role, you forget the defender cards, you put in the silver star offensive cards, And if the scenario suggests it, then some of the gold ones, because the gold ones are going to be the really strong attacks. Likewise, if the AO is going to be the defensive side, you have the silver star defensive cards, and depending on the scenario, possibly add some of the gold star, more extreme defensive behaviours. And this builds up the behaviours that your units are going to take. So that'll be the bulk of the deck, but there are also some specialist cards which pad it out. You have these reload cards. So these randomly instruct you to get the discard pile and the current pile and shuffle it together if certain things are met. For example here, reload deck if the next card die total is 7 or more. So if you draw this and, oh look, the dice total is 7 or more, shuffle everything back except for the reload card. That goes in the discard pile, and you shuffle everything back together, and the cards you previously used may have an effect again. So the reload cards, they can really keep it quite fresh. Aside from that, you've got action and event cards. These are strange one-off things that happen in the game, and these aren't used every game. These are put in based on the scenario, or if you're doing a battle assistant DIY scenario at your own choice. But these are like one-off weird events. Like in this card, AEO Surge. The AEO plays 2 orders cards during that impulse, so it's effectively getting 2 impulses for free. Or you've got a minefield attack, or back into the fight, a half squad will turn back into a full squad. So you've got all these little one-off events to add some spice to the game, and I think these would be really good if there's a way to play them in the 2-player game as well. But I'm not quite sure what I'd use as a trigger for drawing one. But I've been thinking about it, because the little times these do crop up out of the blue, I mean, these are going to be 1 in 10 of the cards at most, so it's not going to happen all the time, but they do add a lot of spice. And a slightly more extreme form of that is the Battlefield Fate cards. So unlike the action events, which are like little one-off occurrences, Battlefield Fates kind of change the rules for everyone. So the action marker recovery here, for any old unit, this can completely strip away any admin markers, so any mood, fight, etc. Got the rally bonus card here, so every single unit in the next rally phase will have all of their rally attempts at -1. And there's a chance for this to stay in play and affect ongoing turns. Command cohesion, like that, all leaders have a +1 to their leadership modifier for the rest of the turn. And again, this one can stay in play. You know, there's all sorts of changes to the game which affect both players in the last. So that'd be a bit trickier in the 2-player game, because the action events are little one-off things, but the Battlefield Fates make it a bit more swingy, and they're rarely included in a scenario. But I think when I do make scenarios with the Battle Assistant, they add a lot of fun to it. And the last type of card is another action event card. These are the scenario event cards. 4 of them for triggering specific events in scenarios. So if you build it yourself, they don't really do anything. But for the pre-written scenarios, they basically tell you to read paragraph B. It adds another layer of triggers to the game. After you've drawn a card and you've come across what you're supposed to do that turn, that's when the next component comes into play, which is the flowcharts. So there's loads of them. While these cards, they give you really generic things like fire, move, dynamic move. These will give you the detail of when and how to do it. I'm not going to rip through every card. I'm just going to show you what they are. So for the first 2 ones, there are offensive opportunity fire and offensive movement. So these decide whether or not you should take opportunity fire when the enemy moves, and when you're told to move, how you should do it. There's a couple of notes here, and when you draw a card that tells you to do that, or when the enemy moves in your line of sight, have a look through these, and they'll tell you whether or not you should react or how you should act. And on the flip side of those, got the same opportunity fire and defensive posture for defense instead of for offense. We've got a shot chart here for when you're told to fire, as to, so you run through whether or not you're going to be taking a ordnance attack, whether or not it's going to be an AFV moving in, whether or not it's going to be a stack of MMCs or some lone gunner. Flip of that, you've got a special table for movement when you've got an AFV's been told to move. You've got off-map unit movement, so in some scenarios when it's these groups will enter from the west edge on turn 1 and they're not on the map yet, and you're told to move. This is where you have a look at it. You look here. And off-board artillery. So if you're told to make an OBA attack, this will tell you what type of fire mission you should take and what kind of target you should aim for. Execute victory conditions. So when that comes up on the cards, it basically, as an offensive player, it will drive you towards your victory. So either the hexes you've got to control, the enemies that you've got to destroy, whatever the scenario calls for. Or if you're a defensive player, what you should be protecting. And the rally phase. So this runs through what's most important. I mean, whether or not you should assemble support weapons or leave them disassembled depending on how far away the enemy is. Combining half squads, all sorts. So it's a good thing to run through, but this is all a bit more common sense. And you've got counteractions. When you are told to execute counteractions, that can be anything to play against what the opponent wants. So this can also tell you to bring in snipers and fire them, or tell you to bring in fire OBA or mortars, or tell you to bring in things from off the map. And this one's actually two-sided. It goes off the bottom and flips around here, which can get a bit confusing, but it does work. And here's the SMC actions table. So sometimes you're told that an SMC should take an action. So here you've got specific SMCs. You work left to right and find one action. So for a normal leader, the first one is if it's night and there's no star shell on the map, fire a star shell. Can you conduct OBA mortar by activating adjacent leader? Yep, do that. More MCs on them. Map here. So, or if you've got a nurse and you've been told to do an SMC action. If you're in a hex with a shaken or wounded AEO, then attempt to heal it. If you're with an armor leader, activate adjacent AFV to conduct a fire attack at an AFV. So you tell them the tanks that need to take fire with other tanks. So when an SMC needs to do something special, you consult here. Likewise, when you're told to move in a special way, you're told to look here. If you've got vehicles that are off board, if you've got vehicles that are in battle, tells you whether to pull out and move away. If you've got MMCs that want to do dynamic movement, tells you how to behave low crawling, doing stealth, assault movement, when you should bring in air support, all sorts there. And the last one is how you do building and sewer movement. So whether or not you should be going to the next floors or going through the sewers, which I don't think is really in Heroes of the Bitter Harvest per se. I think that doesn't really come in until you get the Enemy at the Gates expansion. That's the last tables. Here's just a chart about the role-playing campaign, which that's a whole nother video all of its own, I think. So that's the basic components. So you got your stack of cards every turn, and every time it's universal, you draw one. Every time you need to make a roll, you draw one and consult the dice. It tells you what to do. If you're really not sure what to do, you've got these flowcharts to flick through. And what it does say in the book is that the AO is going to act in ways that you don't think are going to be beneficial for it, and you don't make sense to you. And it suggests that you should just ride it out and go with it. Whatever the AO decides to do with these tools, just see how it plays out. Because the point is, you're supposed to do something. You're supposed to be playing an opponent who acts differently to you, and this will generate things that you're not expecting. On the other hand, sometimes it will do things that are really stupid. So, how you want to play with a solo game like this, it's all up to you. There are rules, but it's a solo game. The only person who's going to be judging on those rules is you. So if you want to completely override what they're doing, override it. If you want to roll physical dice instead of drawing cards for dice, do that. That's fine. And if you want to ignore what the scenario says and chuck in all the gold star defense cards because you think you really want to have a stronger defense to go up against, you can do that. It's fine. It's a solo game. You're the only player you're the only one that cares about players. Overall, the components are really well made. You know, the flowcharts. It's a war game, so it's full of acronyms and initialisms that you're trying to work your way through. So it's a bit dense text-wise, but they do work. And the cards themselves are really simple to read when you get the idea of the threat. So the AO will deal with the nearest enemies first, and then just working your way down. It's all very plain what's going on. And it's all very legible. So component-wise, brilliant quality. Now, how the solo system deals with scenario setup is also really quite cool. So let's say there's going to be a little tank-on-tank battle here, and the German force are going to set up on the map. It will take the order of battle and break it up into groups. So in this case, they've got these 5 groups. You've got 5 AFVs, one of them that's got an armour leader in. We'll know that the Russians are coming from this way, say, so everything that the Germans set up will be aiming in this general direction. But it'll assign a number to each of these groups, and it also tell you to put in some negatives. And these counters will randomly determine who is where. So on this side, they look all standard. So what you do is you flip them all over and give them a good old mix around. And in the scenario setup, there will be a little line saying, just below the groups, the 5 groups, 3 negative counters, and set them up on these 8 locations. So at that point, you just put the locations, say the locations were I2, L4, J5, M6, L2, J2, H7, and G4. And that's where they told you to set everything up. When they're laid, now we just flip through them one at a time. So group 5 goes on that point. Group 2 goes here. Group 4 goes there. Oh, that's a negative. No one there. Group 1 goes here. Nobody there. Nobody there. And the last one must set up here, group 3. So using these counters here as a little randomizer and mixing in some dummy locations, you can never be sure where the opponent's going to come in. Otherwise, you're going to have the Germans are going to be coming in from this western edge at the beginning of the game. You'd get rid of all the dummies here. You wouldn't need them. Get those 3 dummies. And you'd know you've got the groups 1 to 5 as laid out in the scenario. And just give them a little bit of a shake up. When it's time to bring someone off the map, I might bring in group 2. So you can never be sure where everyone's going to be or who's going to come in when. I mean, with all these tanks that are just the same, there's not as much variety, but when you've got infantry games, so you've got an infantryman, maybe a leader, maybe a support weapon, sometimes maybe a foxhole, the layout of the game can be really different. And the defensive idea is never really bad because the hexes they give you are pretty sensible hexes, but you can never be exactly sure where they're going to be. And I think it's a really good way to help set up a scenario. And when you're doing a battle assistant design your own type game, you can still use these. I mean, you have to make the groups yourself and decide where the sensible hexes are. But in that kind of case, I think it's just better to have even more negative counters than you normally would, and just kind of spam the board a bit, because with a design your own, you're never going to be exactly sure what's a key location. Whereas, these have been play tested loads of times, haven't they, by various people, so they'll know where are key locations for the battle. Once the game's set up, you've made your deck, you've set up your game, now you can start putting in your own forces. Well, I've just put together a little fake scenario here just to show you how the Solar System deck works in practice. The Germans are the attackers in this instance, and the purpose for them is to try and get to this objective hex in this building here. So, in theory, that's what the AO should be working towards whilst dealing with the Russian forces. So it's going to just go from the start of a turn. The Germans have initiative. The only thing that could have really happened would be rallying these guys in the rally phase, but there's no self-rally, they've got no leader. So it goes straight into the impulses. So, first German impulse, you draw a card, and we always work from the cards top down. The top threat level is when there's someone who's adjacent, and the Germans do have the force here which is adjacent to these guys, and they're told to do a fire order. So we get out the fire actions flowchart, I think, and work through it. AO, conduct ordnance attack? Nope, there's no ordnance for them. Can they conduct a fire attack? Yes, they can. Are there multiple player units in line of sight and range? Well, in the spotted hexes, we've got these guys in line of sight because they're adjacent, and these guys in the open who are also in line of sight. So yep, multiple eligible AO units can fire. No, there's no multiple AO eligible units because they are the only ones adjacent as per the threat level. So fire at closest actionable player unit before non-actionable player unit. So therefore, because these guys are shaken, these guys are the actionable unit. So they're the ones who are going to be fired upon. For the Germans, we take a card to make their roll. And we take the German dice colour. So they've rolled a 4 with a 4 firepower of 8. That's good. The Russians rolled a 5 plus 4 for heavy constructing building, so they're fine. As always, you mark these guys with a 5 marker. That's the end of that impulse. For the Russian impulse, the unit here in J6 is going to move back to K6 away from the Germans. Now, there is possibility of upfire here, because both I4 and I7 have line of sight to them in motion. So we have to check the offensive opportunity fire flowchart. So on the offensive opportunity fire flowchart, let's follow this through. So the player unit in firepower under ordnance range. Yes, there are. Are there less than half game turns remaining? Let's say there's more than half. So no. Player unit moving multiple units in a stack. No, it's just the one. Is the player unit in +0 or negative terrain? Well, yep, it's no, because it's not in the open. They've moved into a building. Is the player unit destruction needed for the victory objective? No, because the objective is to claim this hex here, not any type of combat. So that goes to no opportunity fire. Now, you've got to follow that process through every time someone moves. So opportunity fire can get a bit clumsy, but as they state heads up with the solar system, you should always feel free to override it. And in many cases, I will. So it's back to the Germans for their next impulse. And again, for their impulse, we draw a card. There's no longer anyone adjacent, but we do have a couple of people within 2 hexes of enemy units. So let's look at the 2. And the first thing is fire. So this could be I4 here, because they've got 2 here, which are in a spotted hex because they are adjacent to them. And you've got I7, who are 2 away from this spotted hex here. I2, I don't believe counts, because although they're within 2, This hex isn't spotted, so effectively they're not really aware of them being there. So we'll follow the flowchart through. Can AE conduct an ordnance attack? No, I'm going to conduct an ordnance attack. AE can conduct a fire attack? Yes, they can. Multiple player unit targets? Yes. Multiple eligible AE units can fire? No, there's only one that can fire, and that's this one. Because this unit is shaken, you've only got to worry about, well, not shaken and moved. This is the only one that counts as possible fire. So I4 will be taking a shot there. So they've got 2 firepower with their leader, 3, and we roll with the dice here. So 6, 7, 8, 9. You've got the D6 plus 4. They rolled a 2 for a total of 6 against the 9, so they will make a damage check at plus 3. So I go for the leader and then the squad. So the leader is fine, but the squad is shaken. I'll put a 5 marker on there, like normal. Into the Russian impulse now, and the weapons team's decided they're going to take a shot at this group crossing the road. They're a bit worried about that machine gun, especially being so close to the troops, so they're not going to try and stop that advance. So the firepower 3 against someone in the open who's got no additionals. Let's see what it is. They roll a 5 for a total of 8. I'm going to draw a card for their defense. Oh dear. A roll of a 1 on the German dice. So that becomes a DC plus 7. So we draw another card, and this card will be for their DC. 6. Oh dear. 6 plus the 7. Total of 13, which is more than double their morale. So they're not only shaken, they're also reduced to a half squad. Just get a little bit of defense there. So back onto the German impulse. So again, we've got some Germans that are within 2, so we'll be looking at the 2 threat level on the card. And what have we got here? So the first thing on the threat is fire at closest vehicle. Well, there are no vehicles in this game, so here there are just infantry and weapons teams. So we'll move along to the next thing, which is lay smoke. So I haven't seen a way of saying definitively who should fire smoke, but sometimes with the solar system you've got to use a bit of common sense, and common sense for me says this unit is going to be putting smoke here to disrupt this gun as much as possible next turn. So they've got smoke exponent of 2. They're going to try and lay it in J3. Oh, roll a 2. Yeah, successful. There's a smoke 1 counter for there. And may get marked as ops complete. So now we're back onto the Russian impulse. So this unit here, I think this unit can't fire anywhere. This unit does have some weaponry, but we want to see what everyone else does because they might want to do some opportunity fire. So in this case, I think as a Russians, we're going to pass. Back over to the Germans. And for their impulse, they first draw reload. Reload the deck if the next card is total 7 or more. And the total of both dice is 8. So it's time to shuffle the deck back up. So everything that's been discarded so far, everything you've worked through, all these go back into the deck for a chance of reappearing, with the exception of the reload card. So let's go back to the drawing board. So we've got to keep in mind that there is still this unit within 2 hexes of an enemy. So we're going to be looking at the threat again. And the first threat 2 line is dynamic move towards. Now what the helper says for dynamic move is an AEO with no assault and no stealth movement will use low crawl towards a player unit, entering positive terrain modifier. It can move into clear terrain only if that's the only choice to move towards the player. So with this unit here, we could move there, but we're not getting any closer to the units. We're still 2 away. We'll still be 2 away if we're there. So with that in mind, these guys are going to low crawl into J7. And just as they low crawl in, K5, who had been holding back for some opportunity fire, are going to take that shot now. So they've got their inherent of 1, their machine gun of 1 for 2. No other bonuses, no movement bonuses because of the low crawl. Well, they rolled a 2, that's a total of 4. And these guys will have and they rolled a 5 with their German dice here. So these guys, no effect from this opportunity fire, except for them being marked as fired. So now we're back into the Russian Impulse, and they've only got 1 unactivated unit so far, this leader and this shaken unit. As they can't do anything offensive, all they're going to do is both move back to cover this objective. They can just do normal movement. There's no line of sight because the rest of the building to them. So they move back, there's no chance for opportunity fire. The end of the Russian Impulse. Back to the last German unit who's still got to move. So when we come to this impulse, the last German unit to activate, so these will definitely be activated whatever comes up on the card, and we'll just have to deal with it as it comes. And the card is, an event, concentrated fire. The German side may use the present card to increase the FP of any 2 separate attacks involving its IFP it makes by +1. The AO is German, so it'll be the next 2 attacks. If the player unit is Germans, then the player may choose which 2 attacks. But for now, this card just gets put to the side over here. And for the next 2 German attacks that's made, I know there's going to be that +1. So that's pretty handy. Although, where they are, there's no assault movement, and that's not going to come into play until next turn. Give the card a flip. They're not within 1 of anyone, so ignore that. They're not within 2 of anyone, so ignore that. So we look at the last bit of the threat. So fire mortar, weapon seaman, there's not one of those, and fire off board artillery, there's not one of those. So we look into the battlefield situation. Highest firepower AEO closest to a shaken player unit. Fire. Well, there's no line of sight to that player unit, so that doesn't really make sense. Next one. AEO mounted in vehicle. Nope, no vehicles here. Shaken AEO. Nope, no shaken AEOs that aren't already activated. So that brings us to execute victory condition. So let's go through the execute victory conditions flowchart. So player unit closest to VO than AO. Yes, they are. Can AO AFV? Well, there's no AFV, so let's ignore that. Can an AO MMC activate closest to VO? Well, he can activate. Yep. So within firepower range of player unit closest to victory objective. Within range, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he's within range, but there's no line of sight. So yes. A perform assault movement? No. So max move towards victory objective, into victory objective if possible, avoid opfire if possible. So I don't have to worry about opfire, so I can be a little bit reckless. So you can move, the movement is 4, I can move 1, 2, 3, 4. Shoot his way up the road. Does open himself up for fire next turn, but he's getting closer to the objective which they need to get to. Now everyone's activated. It's just going to be pass until the end of the turn. So onto the admin phase as usual, and we'll remove all of the markers. Except the smoke, which gets flipped over to a smoke 2. So there'll still be some effect on that next turn. And at the end of the turn, at the end of the admin phase, once again, everything gets shuffled back in. So every card that you have seen has a chance to come back into action once more. And then you roll for initiative, rally phase, and start drawing like normal. So as you can see, the differences of what's on the cards can really affect what's going to come up. The threat level, as the enemy approaches you and gets into a tight range, then you're a bit more tied up in what you can do. But when there's range spread out, you're in the battlefield situation. That's where you get a lot more of the maneuvery type results. Everything up here is a bit fire, lay smoke, fire. But when they're all out of the way, that's when you see people maneuvering a little bit more. But still, following the cards bluntly, the AO will do things that you're not expecting it to do. And that's what makes it for a compelling opponent. Because laying smoke there wouldn't have been the obvious choice for me. I'd have thought of actually just trying to shoot them. Just a direct attack there, but no, the AO said lay smoke, so smoke isn't there, and in hindsight, that smoke will cause me trouble next turn. Likewise, some of the moves here are a bit nonsensical. First, it's not something I'd have gone directly for. I'd have probably tried to go into melee over here, but they said move closest, so I'll move closest. It all adds up to be not the same as a real opponent, but still full of surprises when you're playing them. But the only thing that really slows it down is the stacks of flowcharts that you've got to go through. Some of them you really need to flick your way through, but some of them could just be made a lot more common sense. For example, when it comes down to a unit moving and it could have op fire on it, I think just a die roll based on the terrain they're moving into as a modifier to the die roll to see whether or not they bother taking the shot. I think that would be better than working your way through the big old flowchart. And the flowcharts do slow things down. So personally in my games, what I've come to do is I've come to use the cards, but I go on face value and I just do what would be most logical to me. So if it is a fire, I don't go through the fire flowchart. I go, well, he's one threat, he's closest to them, he shoots them. Or, you know, if it is dynamic movement, I don't get out my movement flowchart. I think, oh, look, he can assault move, that's dynamic, I'm going to do that. Or he can stealth move, I'm going to slip him in around the corner. But as they say in the beginning of the book, if you think better than it, you can feel free to take the reins. This is just a tool to help you have some interesting opponent which doesn't behave exactly how you think they would. And the cards alone do give that variety. The flowcharts give that variety really well. They make all sorts of sensible but unexpected choices, but they do slow the game down significantly. So I'll generally just stick with the deck. The bits and pieces you use of the solar system are entirely up to you. The only person you're going to upset is your opponent, and the only other person at the table is you. So it's all about enjoying yourself. So what more can I say about the solar system? Overall, I've got to say it's a great system. Having the AEO, the artificial enemy opponent, driven by the cards and the flowcharts, it does things that you don't expect. It gives you a challenge that you don't get from playing two-handed. When you play two-handed, you're only ever playing against what you thought anyway. But with this system, it will surprise you and it will do things that you just come out of left field completely. It'll move places you don't think it should go. It'll attack people in ways you weren't expecting. That's all driven by these cards. But what I think lets it down is the flowcharts. It even says it in the book itself, you know, feel free to override it. And what I have overridden most of the time is the flowcharts. If I'm drawing a card and I'm looking at the threat levels here, fire for an adjacent unit, enter melee, overrun for adjacent, they all are obvious of what should happen. Off-board artillery, you know, when you draw these things, you know exactly what you should be doing and where you should be doing them. So I don't even bother getting the flowcharts out. if I don't have anyone close and I get down to the battlefield situation, some of those get a bit more esoteric. And I will look at the flowcharts, but that means I'm looking at the flowcharts once every, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 impulses instead of every impulse, and that really speeds it up. And also the opposition fire. The flowchart for that is a bit of a mindstorm, and it's also got some points where you make a roll as to whether or not you should take the op fire anyway. And I think that if you just do that roll, it speeds everything up completely. You see someone move, they're in line of sight, they're in range, you do that roll. Simple. You don't go through all the stages of, is the firepower going to do it? Is it going? Are there less than half turns left? Or do you need to? It just gets in the way of the whole flowchart. The only things you need to do is do that roll and follow the golden rule, which is AO will only op fire if there is the possibility of causing damage. So if there's someone running into a building and you've got 0 AFP, you don't even bother, do you? So cutting out those bits has sped it up and made it so much more enjoyable. And it is a brilliant, brilliant way to play the scenarios. The way the opponent's randomly laid on the table or randomly comes in, the moves they make when they get there. It is just a 2-player lock and load tactical experience, but with one person, and it is great at doing that. And when you combine it with 2 other pieces that are in this book, you're the solo assistant, but the battle assistant for generating your own battles, and the role-playing campaign for taking your own leader through trials and tribulations, improving with each game, it makes the whole of the Heroes of the Bitter Harvest a really, really great solo experience. The solo assistant is so good, I do not see them releasing another lock and load tactical module without including it and the cards. For the few pages it costs and the few stacks of cards additional, it makes it such a better investment that they'd be fools to release another module without including it. So have you ever played any Lock and Load Tactical? Have you played any of it solo? If so, just drop me a note in the comments. Always love having a little chat with you guys. Until next time, happy gaming!